I was just going to check the sound, but I think we're good to start here. Welcome, everyone. Welcome to Australian Pavilion and Australian Pavilion. Thank you for having us today. So we'll begin. My name is Noora Firaq. I'm Deputy CEO of Climate Outreach. For 20 years, we have been doing social science research to understand how do we engage with people when it comes to climate conversation and climate actions. From our research, we know that change happens when we involve people from all parts of the society and when we engage with people and when they are part of the process and solution making. So why is it relevant to COP and why is it relevant to the ambitious Paris Agreement targets that our world leaders and governments have set? UNFCCC and Paris Agreement itself also recognizes that people are the solution and people is a really key part of this process. Article 6 of the Convention and Article 12 of the Paris Agreement gives a really lovely, possibly my favorite acronym, ACE. ACE stands for Action for Climate Empowerment. It's designed and its objective is to ensure that people are involved in climate action. Unfortunately, ACE itself isn't necessarily the thing that dominates the headlines when it comes to COP and processes. But today we want to have a discussion the importance of Article 12 and involving people, just to help us and to remind all of us that ACE itself is the term that appears in the convention and in the article. The goal of ACE is to empower people through 6 elements. And those 6 elements are education, public awareness, training, public participation, access to information, and international cooperation. Now that I've said the 6 elements, I'm sure that, we are all thinking, we all do part of it or a lot of it in some way or form. It's just that we don't talk a lot about it in the context of implementing Article 12, but we are working towards it, which you will hear from our panelists as well. So just to give a bit more context, because we can't keep making promises, world leaders can't just keep making promises and go back to our respective countries and not honor the promises, we as a civil society do have a role here to engage with our communities and create that social and political mandate within the national context so that our political leaders are held accountable to keep the promises and pledges they make at events like COP. So this is why, again, we've decided today is the right time to have a conversation on implementation of ACE. Climate Outreach has been working with the international ACE community. There's an ACE hub on LinkedIn as well, if you would like to join, to progress the implementation of ACE. We want to frame it from parties and countries seeing it as an obligation, another obligation under the Paris Agreement. Instead, actually, it's a toolkit to unlock progress. Society, civil society actors and communities are already working towards implementing ACE within their respective communities. Wouldn't it be great if we join forces to create that momentum and political leadership that politicians and world leaders need? Glasgow Work Programme was quite a big moment in the Paris Agreement implementation. At Glasgow at COP26, there was a group actively working to advance the implementation of ACE through the COP processes alongside the community. And the Glasgow Work Programme of ACE, adopted at COP26, serves as a 10-year framework aimed at enhancing the implementation of ACE across all levels, international, national, and local level. Glasgow Work Programme offers a guiding principle and sets thematic priority areas relevant to addressing gaps and challenges in implementing ACE. The 4 thematic priority areas are policy coherence, coordination action, tools and support, monitoring, evaluation, and storytelling. The Glasgow Work Programme encourages things like countries assessing their specific needs for ACE programme in the country using social research to understand audience and identify potential partnerships. It also encourages governments to integrate ACE elements in their climate policies and develop a national strategy covering all 6 areas. enhancing cooperation and bringing people together with various expertise like social scientists and to speed up ACE implementation is also one of its key areas. It also provides space for countries to determine the most efficient and cost-effective ways to implement ACE at the national level, because we know every country is different. We know the challenges that exist within each country is different. Therefore, governments are also obligated to appoint a ACE national focal point. National focal points are government-appointed officials that represent the country at COP negotiating level, but also work at a national and domestic level to coordinate different actors and players to progress, including civil societies, to progress ACE implementation. So today we're going to hear from the panelists who are doing wonderful work in implementing ACE. I will open the floor with a brief introduction for them to introduce themselves further and also tell you a little bit more about the work they do. First, we have Arabella Douglas, Chief Strategic Officer at Currie Country Social Change, a distinguished First Nations leader and scholar whose work brings a critical Indigenous lens to environmental economics, social policy, cultural projects across Australia. And then we have Mary Masalina is a proud Samoan Chinese Fijian passionate about the power of storytelling in creating social change. She is a Mianjin-based community organizer and co-founder of the Future Ancestors program. Mary serves the community in several different ways. And then we have Dr. Hendrick. Kaniki is an Indigenous Solomon Islander. He is a medical practitioner by profession and has been a GP for 11 years. Through conservation work, SVTA engages their communities with livelihood projects from food security, community infrastructure, schools and community halls, sanitation, environmental and health awareness. I'm going to start the discussion with Arabella. Tell us a little bit about the work you do to all of us.
Hi, Jingawala from me to all of the guests here today. I think in terms of Currie Country social change, to give the audience some context, we're a traditional owner group that have 7 clans of the Bundjalung Nation. 6 of those have native title. So in terms of advocacy and policy cohesion, we see a clear path for United Nations activism drawn from those that have native title rights that need to actually elevate both the federal state positioning of that policy cohesion. I think that there's a gap in the Australian environment for First Nations groups that are both civil society organisations, non-for-profits, and that sit outside the government formulae. So Currie Country is very much doing that. We've been a group for 14 years. We've been a non-for-profit for about 4 years. But part of that work is assembling ourselves for both our native title position, owning all our history, owning our archaeological information, and actually connecting through bloodlines. So the formula comes from a background of myself, both in native title and environment and planning law, and understanding the gap that actually happens in Australia for the federal position of First Nations people to participate holistically.
Thank you. And now we're going to turn to Mary. Tell us a little bit about the work you do.
Thank you, Noora. Hello, everybody. My name is Mary Masalina Ham. I'm the eldest daughter of the eldest daughter of the eldest daughter. And I share that because that is where my story begins. I am what it means to be village made. I am the product of that. And when you are village made, you move through the world in a different way. You move through the world with an open heart and an open mind, but also a collective heart and a collective mind. And an example, if you've ever sat in the pews of a Pacific church, you'll see the aunties with their beautiful fans, and they're waving because it's really hot. But you'll notice that they're not just fanning themselves, they're also fanning those around them. And that's what it means to move with a collective heart and a collective mind. In looking forward into the past, we lean into our Indigenous ways of knowing and being and doing to navigate the modern world. And for me, when I look into look into the past, I look forward into the past, I see the gift of storytelling that our ancestors have gifted us. I mean, I don't just mean, once upon a time. I mean the story of Sivasamo, of Meke, of Masi, of Siapo, our cultural ways of storytelling. I live in Australia, so-called Australia. I did not grow up on my island home. And my way of connecting is through Sivasamo, through dance. We have a huge untapped community in Australia. We have a huge Pacific Islander diaspora that can really move mountains in terms of the ambition that the Australian government has around climate change. And what better way to engage our people than with the very things that we're fighting to protect, our culture, our song, our dance. And so these are some of the ways in which we engage with our community. And I like to think, how can we make space for those who are woke but are still waking? And that's through the gift of storytelling.
Thank you for sharing. And now we'd like to hear from you a little bit more about the work you do.
All right. Hello, everyone. My name is Dr. Hendrick Kaniki. I'm from the Solomons. Really excited to be here amongst all of you here. Basically, my story would be the typical story of a child from the village. I was the first to go to a higher school up to Form 7, and I was the first to enter university. I studied in Fiji for 6 years for medical school, and after that I came back to Honiara and did my practice for 11 years as a medical officer. But there's always something in your heart that brings you back to your community where you started. A humble story started from making coppers. All of the Pacific Islanders will know. We make coppers to get school fees and stuff. And I'm really excited with my other two brothers. We came up with this community-based organization to support our community. We basically did conservation on our marine and also our forest. And that in terms contributes back to the climate change that we see. The practice that we do from many generations back is still there. It's just nobody knows how to do it. So when we came up in this level, we decided to open a community-based organizations to help us to have connections and partnership with those outside and contribute in whatever ways, especially in this climate change space. So I'm really excited to share part of our story during our discussion. Thank you very much.
Thank you. As we are very lucky today to have islanders on our panel, I would like the next question to be islanders story focused. My first sort of, question is, tell us a little bit about for how long climate change, it might not have the same exact words and language, but for how long has it been as part of your own home story or family story or personal story? And, definitely for me, as being an islander, I also remember that, our countries were predicted to be disappear by now. But we're still here today. So tell us a little bit about how your communities survive and adapt, even though, the climate crisis is worsening.
Yes, definitely. That's a very interesting point. As an island, we are different. Some islands are bigger, some are a little bit smaller, but we experience the same experience. For example, the sea level rise is very evident in our community. For our case, more specifically 2007, there was a tsunami in Solomon Islands and it took some lives. It was actually at my province, in my village. After then, there's what's called king tide. So when the high tide comes, it's beyond and above what's normally experienced. So what happened was most of our villages, because our villages, just like any other island villages, this along the coast. So when the king tide comes, it comes through the kitchen, sometimes through the house and others. So what we did is we moved a little bit further. Especially we depend very much on agriculture, subsidized agriculture. We make gardens for day-to-day consumption and even for small markets. It really affected the produce, the greens and stuff, because there's a level of salt in our garden, so it really affected us. But we survived. There are many practical cultural practices that we've been practicing for many years that pass on through to our elders that help us to survive on day-to-day basis. Even though we experience the changes that happen, we manage to adapt and survive on all these events.
Are there any learnings that you could share how the community came together to adapt? What I'm hearing is, due to salt level rising, the sort of, small holding agricultural economy had to transition and adapt to something different to what it looked back then.
All right, so in our community, there's a traditional knowledge that help us to pick which certain crops or foods are resilient in climate change. Let me give you an example. In my island, back home, in Western Province, when you talk about banana, that would be my island. That's how they label us as the banana island, because we have many varieties of bananas. And guess what? That's one of the main food security ever since, forever. So even though this flooding or level of sea goes up, the banana is still there. It won't go. Even on cyclone seasons, the banana will still be there. If there's flooding, because our island was heavily logged around 2000, that's when we started to do the conservation idea. Back then I was in high school. So now we are experiencing the side effect of heavy logging. So if there's rain, you'll have flooding coming over, and you won't have the cassava and tapioca and potato and all this, but you'll have the banana. So that's one of the examples that I can tell you about. Thank you.
Thank you. There's a lot of knowledge and wisdom there that, there's an opportunity. So Arabella, I'd like to come to you next. Just, hearing these stories, what are the opportunities that exist, especially in relation to your work for the Australian Society in implementing ACE?
I think the education part and the empowerment part is key and critical. One is that First Nations people are older than the Ice Age. We lived within the Ice Age. So in terms of how screwed up can the story get, we are already resilient. I mean, sarcastically, I'd say you can't even genocide us correctly. The colonial project is unsustainable. The banana is an excellent example because, in fact, it dictates and determines that ancient cultures existed throughout the Ice Age and beyond. I come from a culture that's intact. I am part of a collapsed, failing colonial project. Otherwise, I'd be thinking, why am I not talking the way I'm talking? So the empowerment piece for us, and I think this COP, which is very focused on a point in time of science extraction, the good story is we will endure it. Not all of us, but we are inevitable as people. The earth will survive. And banana tells that story because, in fact, it dictates how farming and the harnessing of that produce is indicative of ancient cultures. So the education part is, particularly in Australia, people might know that we're 70, 80,000 years old, but you actually need to lean into the leadership of it and not be frightened by it. And that's extremely profound psychologically for a colonial apparatus such as Australia, because all of the extractive industry is based on individualism and fear rather than actually accepting that we will endure if you actually lean into other sorts of knowing and other sorts of being. And that's very difficult in an individualistic society. In our nation, our mission is with other Bundjalung people to get the confidence of the white people that live there, which is about 500,000, to actually get them used to allowing First Nations science people to lead well. And that doesn't mean lead in the paradigm of supplementing Labor leaders with black-faced Labor politicians or Liberal leaders. That's not leading. Leading is collaboration and actually shared power, and that's very unusual. So when I talk about what we do, I have a very specific role because as an Aboriginal person, I am already the Crown, the state government and the local government in one entity. So I can't do everything, and you're not supposed to do everything. But you can collaborate and lead authentically. And I think it's the confidence that will come with the education. So we've gone through floods in 2022, severe floods. And there was a big push on First Nation sciences will need to be integrated. That's a confidence game because it's already existed. And you can actually, my nirvana is actually people just getting up, stewarding the land, everyone, for a few hours a day. We actually are going to have to move to that intimate participation in recovery. Yes, you could argue First Nations people should do that and we could all be field officers and work in national parks. But the truth is that practice actually has to be spiritually driven. It has to be about the tenderness of your own relationship. So are Aboriginal people better to educate in that? Potentially, yes, because we've got a shorter distance between the recovery of that memory. But we don't have a monopoly on the feeling. It's a global feeling. And so I see Australia having great opportunity because we have a small population relatively. I think that there is a pull away from colonial apparatus generally. And I think that the softness of Indigenous leadership is actually workable. So education is a key part of that, and that's multidimensional because my only job is to get the confidence of everyone that is my neighbour first and give them an alternative to the life that they're living. And that's a huge ask, but climate is actually helping people come into that consciousness because they know that flooding has no bias, we'll be flooded together. They know that fires have no lens of race, we'll be burning together. So the First Nations group that we assist through policy development and articulating arguments and actually galvanising is really just based on allowing the systems that we have to communicate effectively for community narrative and actually building. White people are not my enemy. I just have to convince them that the white apparatus of life is actually the enemy to their own thriving.
Thank you for sharing. What we're hearing from the panel is that Australia has an opportunity because of its diversity and the ancient wisdom and knowledge that exists within the society, and there's an opportunity here to use that to find almost like the key to unlock the next steps and to progress action. And that's very much how we see ACE as well. ACE is a tool to unlock progress rather than being in an obligation. Mary, over to you. Would you like to tell us a little sense of, how does communities at the moment feel in terms of, do they feel like they have that leadership and that power, or do we have to do more to get the process right, the implementation of ACE?
Thank you, Noora. I think I firstly want to acknowledge, and we're probably hearing it a lot across our panel, that communities have always been doing ACE. ACE existed before ACE existed, if that makes sense. And so there's an enormous leadership within our own communities that we can lean into. I think I can, if I speak specifically from a diaspora point of view, so as I mentioned, I identify as Pacific Islander, but I wasn't born or raised on my homeland or my ancestral homelands. And there are many young people and many people in general living in so-called Australia that resonate with that identity, I guess, push and pull. And, as a Pacific Islander living in so-called Australia, knowing that the addiction that Australia has to fossil fuels affects my homeland is a really hard thing to sit with. I am not on the front lines of climate change, but I'm on the front lines of climate action. And our young people that live in so-called Australia, who may not be connected to culture, may not know exactly what climate change is, but they care about their people and their identity. And they care about what happens to their families on the front lines. And so leaning back into our cultural ways of doing, knowing, and being, our song, our dance, our weaving, our chants, that is how we engage those people to then understand this beast of a space. This is very hard to understand if you're not part of this. And so I think the enormous potential of the arts and cultural arts as a tool within ACE is our superpower. And that spirit-led work and connection that we have to place is our superpower. And so that's why we're still here, because we have that enormous knowledge and leadership that has been gifted to us ancestors ago. And then we carry it on into these spaces, and we are staunch in knowing that we have leaders, and we've always had leaders, and it's time to see how that might look like in the modern day world, and we look forward into the past to learn how we do that best.
Thank you for sharing. I want to hear a little bit about the challenges now in your respective work. ACE is a really good way of framing the work that Indigenous leaders, First Nations, island leaders have been doing for years and are doing in many different ways, and probably innovative ways that we've not even heard from. So I want to hear a little bit more about the challenges you face in implementing ACE and doing the work you do.
I think the challenges from the Australian position after the failed yes vote are quite clear. I think the government is at a loss for defining itself and understanding how to integrate an Indigenous narrative. So you're seeing the operation of the Coalition of Aboriginal Peaks as an alternative, because there is still a lack of vision, both in the region. Australia is the largest, deepest pockets in the region of our part of the world. There is still a lack of vision to integrating both the Pacific excellence and a different opportunity to actually persuade and direct. And that comes from, in my view, an insecurity about being part of a colonial project that is remote from itself. So if you were to talk about how Australia's psychology is politically, it's a political north psychology, but we are in the southern hemisphere. So it's almost as though you're creating policies that you'll actually be brutalising your own physicality. That's extremely challenging, both frustrating for First Nations people to witness, for people in the Pacific to be a part of, and for a lack of vision and clarity to actually step out. And I want Australia to be a leader. I want Australia to lead well. But we are caught in the matrix of extractive industry dance that don't actually even put us at the top 10 table. That's where we are. The state of California and New York have got larger economies to deal with on the daily than parts of whole states of Australia. So I am, awaiting a change in leadership in Australia to actually get serious about who they can be. And partly that's a white question and a white answer, because they have to define themselves. But their neighbours are all brown-skinned people in the Pacific. They are in a entrenched argument of great diversity and great opportunity to develop differently. And I'm yet to see that. But I understand the pressures that come. But I really do believe that they could actually clear a way to be a little bit different. And I look forward to that. But that is a challenge to be a First Nations person in that experience, because the answer is not to participate in the apparatus of oppression. That's not the answer. The answer is actually to operate and gain the confidence of the government to behave differently. And that's extremely challenging.
There's a deep personal work that we all need to do to be able to go beyond what we know is we know how we know, to be able to get there. Thank you for sharing. Mary, tell us a little bit more about the challenges that especially the communities you work with and engage with. Essentially, you're doing a lot of community engagement at a very grassroots level. I want to hear about the engagement challenges that you face.
There's a Samoan proverb that I always like to lean into, and it says, "E fofo e la lamea le alamea," and it talks about the crown of thorn starfish. And the crown of thorn starfish, for those who may not know or who may not have seen, is a really spiky-looking starfish. And it's said among Samoan fishermen that if you are to stand on the alamea, or the crown of thorn starfish, it will inject a poison into your foot, and it's very painful. But if you were to flip over the alamea, on the back of the starfish, it has a spongy-like back. And if you were to press your foot against that back, the alamea, the crown of thorn starfish, will heal its own doing. And we use this proverb to teach us two things. One, that the challenges that are faced by any community are best solved by that community. And two, that action takes healing and healing is action. So for our community, we know what we need and we know what that looks like. But the beat of our drum isn't heard by those who hold decision-making power. It's not heard by those who have the finances to resource us. It's not heard by those who can help us. And so the challenge is actually persuading those who have the decision-making power that how we do things and why we do things is the right way, because we already know. And so that's the challenging part, and it takes an emotional, spiritual toll on community. You know, that's what causes burnout. And so that's probably one of the greatest challenges, that we know what's best, we know what works, we can see it, we have vision, but we're constantly trying to persuade those up top that what we do matters and how we do it is sufficient.
Thank you. Hendrick. Would you like to tell us a little bit about the challenges in the areas of your work as well?
Thank you. That's a very good one. Thank you for my other two panelists for their excellent points shared there. I would like to contribute as well on my context. Back in the Solomons, just like in the island, we have small land but big ocean. So even though our country is small, but to travel from one place to other, it's already a challenge. It's already a challenge. And also, in our context in the village, we don't have many educated people compared to the whole of the population. And unfortunately, all those that are educated, we have to travel to the center of the country, probably the capital. For our context, it's Noora. So we have less people to get us updated or get us what's going on around and how we contribute on that. That was a challenge. And for our context, we started our association. It's 100% voluntary. It's 100% voluntary. So we do things during the holidays, and we do things when we have family commitments like death in the family that we have to travel back in the village, or there's a marriage, we have to go back to the village. That's where we help our people, especially when it comes to education, educating them, getting them updated. For example, my village, there's no network. I cannot communicate with them. The only way is I have to go physically to be there, and it's really expensive in our context. So that's some of our few examples that we are finding difficulty with, but we are getting there. We are getting there. That's part of the reason why I practiced as a medical officer for 11 years with the government in Honiara. Just last year I resigned, and I went back to the province. It's much easier for me to get close to the community. So I live just next to our island, still practicing, but much easier for me to help out with our community projects and community activities. So it really comes with ownership and the genuineness of doing things, not just to tick the box and do this. Oh, I've done this, I've done this. It takes more than that. It takes more than that to do what we do in our community level, especially with the limited access and finance, of course, and the difficulty in travel and all these other challenges. Thank you.
Thank you for sharing. From three of you, what I'm hearing is the biggest challenges are around resourcing and power, especially when it comes to the ACE elements with regards to public participation and public awareness and education. The resource element and specifically funding element and the power. Would any one of you or all of you would like to share a little bit about what public participation in a context of well-resourced and in the context of well-distributed, appropriately distributed power structure can look like? If we were to imagine from your perspectives, where your communities and those who have been surviving and adapting have the leadership and being able to unlock that knowledge and wisdom to be shared and respected by decision makers, and having that public participation from your communities, what does that look like? Tell us a little bit.
I think there's a couple of things, because Currie Country's got two parts. We've got a business arm as well, 36 small business operators, but the fantasy for all of our family is, you know, part-time work and full-time money, because the issue about being funded to be human or being funded to be value needs to be disrupted. So I start from a position of looking at Australia's GDP. I look at 3% of that. That's 30 billion a year. I have no issue with people just being funded to live and thrive. You don't need to be of utility in a system. You can be funded. So most community programs, activities should actually allow people to be fully peopled, fully actioned, fully volunteered, and have other things that are taken care of to participate in that. So it's not about getting volunteers to do the job of government and actioning volunteers. It's actually changing that participating on a community level or a communal level is valued and other things are offset. So other things that you may need are taken care of. That's actually where we need to move to. There is a huge push on community development programs because people who are in those spaces are driven by something that's not moneyed, generally, and yet they have to argue for money constantly. But again, First Nations people in every country in the world should be well funded to just be First Nations people. So the luxury life is not more utility from me. The luxury life is more practice of being human. That's the luxury life. And we need to allow for that and stop thinking we need to extract our value, like we extract our minerals, to be worthy of thriving and living. Australia has no reason at all to have a underclass, a poverty poor. It makes no sense. The only reason that is occurring because of non-sharing and distribution of wealth, not because of the lack of creation of wealth. So it doesn't matter how many tricks I do and pretend I can be paid for those. The truth is, I should be okay without having to perform. And so that is where we are, and floods have gotten us there in the regions. People are moving away from trying to extract our own abilities into a system and trying to live differently. And that is the only way it will be. The government is not going to save you or pay you to be human. You have to determine those things yourself. So,
Thank you. Mary, would you like to tell us what that looks like from your perspective?
Yeah. I think I lean into what you were sharing around like allowing our people to live in purpose and walk in purpose, whatever that looks like for them.
yeah,
And moving at the speed of trust.
yeah,
I know that I don't know it all, and I know that everyone in our community has a gift that is unduplicated, and it's for them to determine what that looks like. But there's no trust, and so it's like just give us what we need and we'll do it.
yeah.
That's essentially, 101. And so my vision is for us to be able to, again, look forward into the past and live as our old people did. And that's, I guess, as simple as it is. Yeah.
Whoop, whoop, whoop. Would you like to go next?
Yeah, thank you very much. Very interesting points. From our context in Solomon Islands, if some of you might not know, but way back 10, 20, or even 100 years ago, we used to live in isolation, even within an island. That's if you ever heard of head hunting, that's from our context. Each community, they fight for their own space. So it's kind of difficult to live together. And that's what too, sometimes it really, become a difficulty in sometimes working together for us. So what we need now is we are still working on together and getting communities that are organized to work together, and together with our provincial government, our national government, but work together to achieve what we do. Financially, of course, it's difficult, but we can still manage. Our total population is just around 700,000 plus. We're not even a million, and that's the whole country. It's very small. So there's still hope. They still hope to work together to get to where we are. Thank you.
I like the last word, hope, a lot. There is hope through public participation. That's refreshing. As a final question for the panelists before we open questions from the audience, I want to ask Mary, we're going with the theme of hope and tools for implementing ACE, specifically public participation. Tell us about how storytelling is a tool for implementing ACE and progressing ACE, and how storytelling is part of the culture, and culture itself can be a tool, and how whether culture evolves as well. Just something around culture, tell us that.
Yeah. I think my panelists can agree that we all share a really spiritual connection to place, to our land, to our sea, to our sky. how do you communicate that connection and that deep spiritual belonging to those who will never understand? How do you communicate that? And I feel like the closest thing that you can get is through storytelling. It's the thing that shifts hearts and shifts minds. It moves beyond language, it moves beyond barriers, and it's the one thing that I feel like connects us as humans. And that is the power of what storytelling is and how we can use it as a tool. And storytelling, of course, has many different faces. It can be, music, art, dance, combination of all the three. And that is an often untapped tool that is so inherently part of who we are. And so I think that's the role of storytelling in ACE and beyond as well. That's how we connect as humans. Don't know if that answers the question.
It does. It very elegantly and beautifully as well. Thank you. So what we are hearing is that it's important to remember our human side and feelings and our knowledge and wisdom that we hold through our ancestors in implementing ACE. And that itself is a powerful tool to unlock progress. And most importantly, the respect. The respect and the power we hold as well. I feel like, at different various points we've had, claps here and there. So before I open to questions, I'm just going to say, shall we give a big round of applause to our panelists all together? And we'll now take some questions. So we'll take a couple of questions from the audience, and then we'll do in rounds. Thanks, Oli, for helping.
Catherine McCallum from Climate Action Network Australia. Just thinking of the potential of Australia and the Pacific hosting COP31, I'm just really interested from your points of view, if we had a really powerful civil society and community engagement across Australia and the Pacific for that event, what would that look like if you were thinking big and bold and drawing on all these beautiful ideas that you've been sharing? What would it look like to do an amazing job of COP31 with Australia Pacific, a really vibrant, a really participatory COP? From your community's point of view, what would that look like?
Shall we take a couple before we answer? Yeah. A couple of questions. Any other questions?
Thank you so much, and I'm Kesaya from WWF. Related to that question, what is the role of community or civil society organizations in something like a COP, particularly thinking about potential Pacific Australia COP? Thank you.
Arabella, would you like to go first?
I think for me, the fantasy, it's so interesting that you've got 700,000 people, so that's, the Aboriginal population of Australia. I think the fantasy would be the connection between both Pacific Island people and First Nations people collectively to actually give either the Australian government, because they're big, deep pockets, investors and suppliers, a better idea and a better vision. So I think that is something that only civil society organisations could both achieve and develop. And I think that's a way to activate a response from the community at large to be engaged in what is occurring in their part of the world. Pacific has led in climate in our region. First Nations people's voices are often muted because of other political apparatus. So the agenda would be to have a clear line of sight with each other. And I think that could be achieved. I mean, the Pacific is small in numbers, but big in votes. And so if I was to think of the seventh state idea, which is, Aboriginal people having their own autonomous political apparatus inside the country of Australia, I would be seeking to align traditional owners directly with Pacific Island nations.
Would you like to come in, Mary?
It's no secret that Australia has an addiction to fossil fuels, and it's literally killing our people. A COP in partnership with the Pacific, for me, looks like Australia taking the Pacific and our Indigenous Torres Strait Islander and First Nations Aboriginal people's demands seriously and acting on that. And we see a phase out of fossil fuels. the hosting part of COP, this part of COP, we can 100% do. We know how to host. You know, we know what that could look like, 100%. But the part that we're all trying to, I guess, people are avoiding, not saying us, I'm just saying people, is that we need a phase out of fossil fuels, and we need Australia to come to the table and be a true climate leader and lean into the leadership of Aboriginal, Torres Strait Islander and Pacific Islander communities.
Yes, thank you. I would like to add on to the points of my other two colleagues. It will be a give and take. Give and take, I mean, is what our people will bring on the table will have a different view. And also, we can come and learn from each other or learn from other people that will come there during the COP. So it's both ways. It's a give and take. So that would be really nice.
Thank you. We'll take another round of questions.
I don't know, something's going on over there. Big action.
Hi, my name is Zahra, and I live and learn on Wajak Noongar country in Perth, Western Australia. I also pay my respects to any First Nations people in the room today for welcoming me and my family on the land that I live on today. I had a question regarding the language utilised, particularly at conferences like COP, which fundamentally exclude First Nations and marginalised communities. What role do you see decolonising language in spaces like COP influencing solid engagement from First Nations and marginalised communities?
I just will answer that because I think there are two key parts. I mean, there are people like First Nations people in Australia that have applications before the Decolonisation Committee of the United Nations. So there are steps where autonomous thinking is occurring to, for us, it would be an application to decolonise as well for a committee. That might look like different nations doing that within Australia. So those pathways are open, and they are pathways. The UN will become more important, in my view, as Trump takes office, etc. So I think you will see people start to agitate as a sovereign positioning within inside this cycle to actually get both status and a place and an engagement that's direct with the Australian government at a different level. So there are only two countries that have committees that have got applications before those committees at the moment. They are similar in terms of they are part of a colonial apparatus, and I see that Australia First Nations people will start to consider those routes because it's the evolution, if you like, of Mabo and native title generally. It's the international manifestation of that because of those limitations. Australia is yet to adopt the United Nations Declaration of Indigenous Peoples. It hasn't made a commitment to follow Canada and do something similar at a federal level, which it could have. So the only way, and I'm happy to be wronged by other strategists in the room and lobbyists, but the only way is to agitate differently. So that will definitely be something that I'll see in my lifetime. I don't wish for that to occur. I wish Australia follows Canada and goes, okay, let's just do a C-15 and, you know, make everything in compliance. But our tension is that we suffer from the burden of articulating the push against the resource imperative. And unfortunately, we're a small group inside Australia that the public needs to lean into so we can fight extractive industries together. And they're not yet comfortable with that. So I'm happy for campaigns like that to roll out in lieu of an application to the UN, but I do see that there will be First Nations Australian groups who will have to lobby internationally to both get the decent articulation of their issues in these spaces. It's yet to happen.
Thank you for your question, Sahara. I think just at the real foundational level, in that, why can't we have language in these spaces? Why can't we have song and dance and the things that make us human in these spaces? Simple things around using our native tongue in these spaces. I know we do, but we don't normalize it as much as we should. And that, I think, begins to change how our people interact with this space and what that looks like. And also the reciprocality of that in the learning of both. I would love to be able to, hear the voices and the chants of my old people in this space. It's what fuels our spirit so that we can do this work. And so the fact that we have to strip that away from ourselves to be able to show up is really, really sad. So I think, yeah, in terms of language, I would love to hear our native tongues used more openly and proudly, not just within our own civil society spaces, but in the high-level decision-making and in the plenaries and amongst the professionals of this space as well.
Yes. Yeah, thank you very much. I think the level of freedom to express yourself, that's very important. And that will be really take away from me.
Thank you. We will, even if you don't have a question, if you'd like to share anything about, in relation to anything that's been discussed in the panel, ACE implementation involves all of us. So I'd like to open the opportunity for anybody in the audience to share anything you would like to contribute, how we unlock progress. Would you like to introduce yourself to those of us, to some of us, please?
Hi everyone. Great to see a panel on ACE, and just to introduce myself, my name is Jared Huntley. I'm actually Australia's ACE national focal point. So this is a network of parties that have, dedicated folks within government who are looking at how you actually implement ACE at all levels. Love it to see a conversation, and I think the more we talk about ACE and the more we understand what it is, we can actually start to build these radical collaborations that kind of go beyond the traditional kind of structures that we've seen previously. So I encourage you all to check out the different events that are happening throughout COP. Come and observe the ACE negotiations to see how we're kind of discussing and where we're at in the kind of the negotiations process. So we have the Glasgow Work Programme and the Sharm el-Sheikh Action Plan, as I'm sure Noora outlined. But I just wanted to pick up on that point Mary made about, ACE is the opportunity for us to bring some of that fun stuff back into climate conversations, right? Art, culture, dance, like music, like I think there's a bit of a disconnect with the way that we talk about climate change. It's not fun. It is doom and gloom. It is an existential crisis, but we could also talk about climate change in different ways. And I think ACE is one of those opportunities where we can get different sectors involved to kind of bring in some more of these conversations that really kind of direct some of that energy towards kind of outcomes. So yeah, just wanted to introduce myself and encourage you to reach out. I'm happy to chat about how we do things on ACE in Australia. There were some great events in Australia, and Noora had a wonderful video, and we had some other speakers there talking about sort of how ACE is really connected in with kind of fairness and rights and gender equality and the rights of Indigenous peoples and disability and all these really inclusive approaches that we can bring into the work that we do. So thanks.
Any other thoughts to share? Please.
Hi, I just wanted to thank you all so much. This is probably the best panel that I've attended at COP. Yes. I had a question. I was curious how you see storytelling as a way to build real power that can influence, and also how you see that as an adaptation strategy. So kind of in what way do you see storytelling filling either of those specifically?
I think the storytelling narrative is so interesting because we will go into a federal election in Australia next year at some point. I think the US example tells us there's an absence of good storytelling about a future of a world that we actually need to co-create together. There is a bereft argument that was had by the Democrats, who had too much power and failed to dream forward and daydream and do good storytelling about a position where we could be in the world. There is a constant, perpetual failure of that. I'm not in any sort of marketing role, but I know there are experts probably floating around or people that do that. But what I see from that is the lack of storytelling. What I know from community integrity is that we have to constantly reaffirm ourselves through storytelling, both in value, that we're alive, that we matter, that we exist. And so we are more experienced in understanding an opposition to a narrative that runs contrary to our existence. But I see that at a global level. There is hardly a vision for the world that doesn't include the dialogue of talking about resources, but there's an alternative world. But no one's talking into that story. And again, I think because of the inevitability about First Nations people, I know that we will survive even if most of the world dies and the planet will survive. I and my family are more open and less concerned about the inevitability because we understand that it's a story about ourselves ultimately. It's your relationship with life itself. And that looks like a religious framing from some dimensions, but there is a lack of global storytelling about how we can be different and what is the world to be different. So I would pull on better storytelling in the mass media domains to tell a different alternative script for ourselves. There is just nothing there. And that is why you're going to get people operating in fear. So.
Thank you. To close, I just made a little bit of notes while we were having the discussion. So we really wanted to have this conversation around how do we unlock progress through implementation of ACE and also bring people together to join the ACE community. What the themes that we've been hearing from our lovely panelists is that to make sure there is meaningful public participation, we need to bring tools like storytelling to the fold, and also we need to give leadership and ownership and put the community leaders in the driving seat when it comes to public participation. There needs to be bottom-up approach as much as a top-down approach, specifically when it comes to public participation. And when it comes to education and access to information, that we need to build the social infrastructure that enables us to do it from central hubs like cities to rural areas, and it's almost like a social structure that needs to be developed for information flow. And most importantly, we need resourcing for training, mobilization, and also for education. And we touched upon cooperation, international cooperation. Australia offers an opportunity with COP hopefully coming to Australia with regional cooperation at a mega level at a COP that we've never seen before. I believe that could be a unique moment there for us. But you know, just hearing all of you speak, I also picked up that Australia has the beautiful gift to offer to the world when it comes to to be an exemplary on international cooperation, because Australia is very uniquely placed to start with regional cooperation that could be scaled in implementing ACE. So before I just give all of you 30 seconds to say your final words, 30 seconds, I'd like to invite all of you to join Jared with ACE negotiating floor and the ACE community that Jared is also working really hard to grow. And if you have any questions on how to engage with those communities, just reach out to any of us, please. Yes, we'll start with 30 seconds. We'll start with Arabella, with yours.
Sorry, 30 seconds. What was
It's
the
a really last final thoughts and words. 30 seconds is a really short time.
My final thought and word is this. If the idea about sharing genuine wealth upsets you or makes you feel a little bit uncomfortable, if you're thinking about First Nations people in Australia being genuine sharers of wealth, then please go home and consider that feeling, because then you're part of the problem. We must get to a feeling where we are okay with genuine sharing of both wealth and resources.
Thank you.
The science, the policy, the text doesn't mean anything until it's communicated to our communities.
I would say in the islands, so in the Pacific, we survived. We're still here. Of course, the side effects of the climate change is here, but we've survived. So we have many things to offer. We just need to work together.
Thank you. So power, island leadership, and communications are the three things that we need for implementing ACE and progressing climate action. Thank you. Thank you for having us, and thank you for the great conversations.